And you got stuff after you're done, so that's what stuff that has to be done. So often, I should. But you're in the city. See, I'm 2 miles in, so coming down the city is kind of a. We should. Sure. Why don't you?
These two is also
Exactly.
what do you have the
I just write the notes. I got a developer there for face to the night. So for a while. So that's kind of first web page, 5 minutes, exams. So feeling old.
don't worry about it. I started in 1997.
Working on website?
Yeah. Not the first, but it's pretty. So web was just a more
Right.
but now at work they ask me to do so it was kind of fun.
That's great.
I feel like
See, now that you're true
so this semester we're going to publish some iPhone games.
That's great.
That's just fun.
Absolutely.
So what websites do you?
I managed the NRL main page, the internet, although that's really redundant, I'm more of an application developer, so facilities on
Oh, Lee's here.
all of those web-based applications.
No, Barrett's there.
They're trying to
Casual Lee.
I know, right?
Yeah, how's it going?
Sweater. Yeah, I don't know. But
Mr. Rogers and up in here.
just put on your like little lace up sneakers.
Yeah, I know.
When you come up with all things that help with management.
All right, folks. What do you say we get started? If you guys didn't know, this is OMG DDoS. If you're not supposed to be here, it's very clear that this is what we're going to talk about today. So, just to get a sense of the room here, how many people have actually well, first of all, how many people are sysadmins? All right, how many people general Drupal developers? All right, so this is definitely kind of not geared towards a lot of Drupal. There are some things we can do, but a lot of this is going to be talking about it's kind of a DevOps talk. So a lot of it's going to be focused on the things you do before we get to Drupal. So I just want to make that clear. So my name is Dave. I am a senior software engineer. I might look like a graphic designer today, but that is indeed not my role. I'm @Uncola on Twitter. Please follow me. I have some valuable insights occasionally. Most of the time it's just random ranting. I'm also dstol on Drupal.org. I maintain taxonomy menu. If you use it, I apologize. It's a series of unfortunate bugs strung together to kind of achieve some functionality that people tend to like. I also kind of notoriously maintain the kill switch module. Don't use that ever, but it can disable a website. If your client doesn't pay, don't use it ever. Bad for the community. Don't use it. So, show of hands, how many people have actually experienced a DDoS here? Okay, that's good. At least from the standpoint of this talk. I hope you guys, if you have something to say or you think I'm wrong, I totally encourage you to call me out on it. Like, I'm just one guy who had some experiences at a job and, was, thrust into the fire a couple times, and, I turned out okay. I'm still alive, and so are you. So, yeah, great. So, let's get started. These are my coworkers. If you're not familiar with them, they're anonymous. They're also assholes. It's kind of everyone's coworkers go. They're all about hacktivism. It may or may not work. Like, they try to take down a website in order to kind of gain some, like, the ear of the person whose website they may be taking down. So, for instance, like the CIA, they've taken that down, but did that really, affect any kind of thing for the CIA? I realize now I should have included the obligatory XKCD in this about ripping the poster of the website down, but I didn't. I think it's an apt kind of analogy here, because we all know that when someone takes the website down, it's not the end of the world, but when your grandmother reads that the CIA's website's compromised, she's worried about her social security number and like her file kind of thing. So these are some experiences me and my asshole coworkers have had together. So generally, Anonymous functions on the principle of kind of crowdsourcing their attacks, which means they rally around certain chat rooms online. They also use Twitter to kind of stage and organize themselves. And so these are some of the hashtags that I've seen and been involved with. Some of them are fake, obviously, like hashtag, but yeah, like Mega Upload was a big deal because people were angry about that and thought that their only venue was hacktivism to resolve things. So anyways, kind of a little enough about my history in DDoS. So what do you do when you realize the DDoS is happening? It might be too late. Your site might already be down, but hopefully you catch it. Hopefully you have enough infrastructure set up that when it starts to the flood starts to begin, it's not, you get a little notice, maybe not a lot of notice, but a little bit. So what do you do? First step, and if you're not familiar, this is Mark Sonnebaum. He works at Acquia. I think this is just a good slide. Get good data and analyze it. This is kind of key to any kind of DDoS remediation, is kind of knowing what you're up against and knowing what's coming down the pipe when it really matters, because you got to realize, like, oh, my whole origin might go down in 5 seconds if we don't do something about this. Granted, it's probably going to go down anyways, but that happens. So you got to act quickly. But a lot of times you can act beforehand. Sorry. And you got to have a plan. So, DDoS is one of those things that it's great because, your site's really big, and if you're an e-commerce site, DDoS can mean like millions in dollars in revenue loss, that kind of thing. But you have to have a plan. So this might involve failing over to your secondary data center. It might involve just blocking them. It might involve scaling up massively really quickly on an infrastructure that can support that kind of scale very quickly. Basically, it's to have a plan, and quoting one of my coworkers here, said, the best disaster plans can be ruined by actual disasters. This is, of course, overheard at Velocity Conference. So, it's really, like, you have to know kind of what you're up against and plan for the worst. Like, if your origin can do, 10 megs a second, you have to plan for 100, plan for 1,000. Like, some of these things probably not realistic, but you kind of have to assume as an organization, if you want your website to maintain like availability across the country or across the world, you need to either say, all right, it's fine if they attack us and our website goes down for a little while. We're okay with that because we don't want to, spend the money to keep our site online during this time. But for other places like Amazon, I'm sure, they're denial of service attacked all the time. But their site's still up. They're still, serving traffic, still making sales and raking it in. But here's a lot of questions you can ask yourselves. Like, who do you tell? It's one thing, like, maybe, you call the police. I don't know what the police are going to do for you. Escalate to, like, FBI, NSA, CIA. Maybe that's part of your government organization's SOP for this kind of thing. It's a lot of questions that you kind of need to look at beforehand and say, all right, like, this is what we do when this happens. And, having a good plan is a great way to get ahead of it. But, what do you do now that you're actually getting DDoSed? You're, initiating, like, you provision some more servers, you've contact your business's hierarchy, you've, worked through how you're supposed to deal with, all of that kind of SOP stuff. But now how do you, like, really get into the meat and potatoes of blocking a DDoS attack? I think it first starts with log analysis. You have to look and see what your traffic's coming into your boxes to be able to understand it. I assume you also have multiple servers too, which may not be true, but hopefully it is. So I like Splunk. Splunk is really expensive. They do a licensing model based on your data. So if you have a lot of traffic, you generally have a lot of data being generated in your access logs, your sys logs, your mod security logs, that kind of thing. And they charge you based on your usage. So I like it because it's one of those things where if you don't have Splunk and you're talking like, oh, it's this great tool, it's really cool to use, it's really expensive, which I'm sure is a real factor for a lot of organizations these days. But when you have it and then you don't have it, you're like, oh god, like Splunk would be so great for this because you can see trends and graphs and all of this kind of cool stuff right out of the box with very little setup. There are some also, because this is an open source conference, there are some other tools you can use. Facebook uses Hadoop and Hive for their log analysis because you can imagine they do tons of traffic and they have to farm it off to multiple servers to do any kind of log analysis at all. I also like Google Real-Time Analytics. It's new. It's a beta product that a lot of people miss in Google Analytics. If you're on Google Analytics, it's the button right next to standard reporting. Click home and then you get another page where it has real-time analytics. So you can see real-time people who are on your site. Might not be a DDoS kind of thing, but it's good for high traffic events like, oh, this blog post is getting a lot of traction in like Saudi Arabia, or you can just kind of see that stuff that you might not get from like an IP address and an access log. There's also Logstash, which is written by a guy who used to work at Splunk, so he kind of knows how things work there. There's also Flume and Graylog, and there's also a logging software as a service company called Loggly. I've never actually used it, but it's kind of an interesting thing. So the reason I like these tools is mainly because if you've ever looked at an access log, it's really hard for you to say like, oh, this is my DDoS. Like, what's legitimate traffic? What's illegitimate traffic? So I think I said this at the office sometime, but humans are notoriously bad at recognizing patterns. If you look at this, what's legit here, right? Like, does anyone see anything here that is legitimate or illegitimate? See, no one's pointing out any kind, like, this. Well, this is just my website. I'm sure now my coworkers have tweeted things about anonymous being assholes. I'm sure my site's under DDoS right now, but no, it's just, it can be down. Like, I don't care. It's fine. So yeah, this is just a standard, access log on my server. Nothing going on. Maybe, I don't know. But the nice thing about, say, like a Splunk or a Loggly or any kind of logging service is you recognize patterns really easily. So like here, oh God, what's that? You get to generalize your data in a way that you can see patterns really simply. So like this is an access log of just an event that happened on a server that I happen to have access to, and you see really quickly, because this does counts of events, you see really quickly like there's something, and then whoa, there's something else. Like, so you get to drill into these events kind of automatically with Splunk. I feel like I'm selling you Splunk here, but it's really cool. I love it. But also, you might not see patterns, and this is just some Nagios pinging a server. Don't worry about it. But sometimes patterns may not exist. Like there's a little blip there, but that could have been, who knows, whatever. So what does anonymous generally use to like attack you with? When you think anonymous, most of my experiences, they're kind of script kiddies. So they'll download an application and deploy it against your systems. This includes things like low orbit ion cannon, which is it's an application you can download. I think it's Windows. It's cross-platform. You can run on Linux, Windows, Mac if you want. You basically just plug in a URL and you hit fire in my lasers or charge in my lasers or something like that. Of course, everything's like LOL speak kind of thing, but you're basically doing GET requests against whatever server you want to attack. In terms of like real effectiveness, this is just doing continuous GET requests against the server. It's kind of really easy to protect against, and it's kind of the lowest common denominator of like DDoS tools. There's even a lower common denominator. It's low orbit ion cannon light, or LOIC light. This one just runs in your browser. So you might get to a site, it might have like a hidden iframe in it, and it'll just start triggering a DDoS attack against a URL that the attacker wanted you to attack, but you might not even notice this. We actually saw this pretty commonly. People would share links on Twitter with like a anonymous operation hashtag, and people would start clicking these links thinking they had like valuable information on them, and you unwillingly or unknowingly became an attacker in this attack. Same thing like a bot network where your computer might have a virus, but it might not ever know it. You could be doing complex math to like crack something, or doing a DDoS attack kind of thing. The kind of scarier one is high orbit ion cannon. They went a little higher in the atmosphere here, but this one uses files you download. So typically they'll share, they're called HOIC booster files, HOIC high orbit ion cannon, which have a predefined set of URLs and user agents and request methods, so they can do gets and posts, which posts are a little scary to me. It also does refers, so you can generalize. Like it's probably one of the most kind of destructive tools that they can hit you with. But a lot of times people don't know how to attack a site, and a lot of times this kind of work involves thinking like an attacker. So I like to think that this is all kids who are having fun and having a good time, thinking they're doing some good, arguably. But high orbit ion cannon can do some serious damage to your infrastructure, because it's really hard to detect those patterns in your data when they may be using hundreds of user agents, hundreds of refers across hundreds of IP ranges. And there are other tools you can use. These are all tools for good generally, like Apache Bench, curl, JMeter, Siege. Like I've used these for load testing on servers before, but they can be set up to be used maliciously if you so choose. Let's talk about the tools of our trade. So we don't want our DDoS to take our servers down, or we do, and that's an acceptable thing too. A lot of these are Apache based, which I like Nginx. I definitely prefer Nginx. I'll talk about this in a second, but I think it warrants speaking about. So a lot of these tools exist because of the maturity of Apache and relative immaturity of Nginx. You can definitely set things up to use Nginx and use Apache in kind of like a multi-tiered, Nginx would be your load balancer serving from cache on like local disk on Nginx, but it adds a lot of kind of overhead with serving things, especially like doing advanced log aggregation for mod security, running a custom rule sets, running mod evasive. Getting a little ahead of myself here, but there's mod security. This is a web application firewall that exists for Apache. It doesn't actually do anything if you just install it on your server. It's kind of no fun without the rule sets. OWASP, if you've ever heard of it, is a security best practices thing, and they have a rule set, like I think it's 150 some mod security rules that do things like check that the HTTP protocol is correct, check that things match, and things like the protocol, there aren't protocol violations. It'll do some blacklist lookups. It can do some DDoS protection. Also does things like checking for malware. It can do some Trojan stuff. It can detect SQL injection attacks, cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgeries, kind of out of the box, which is great because it's a community-maintained rule set. So if you want to improve on something, definitely get involved in it because these are rules that I know. Yep. So that's the OWASP security rule set. OWASP security rule set and mod security are kind of tightly coupled, even though they're kind of two separate things. So mod security is useless if you just install it, and you need to have a rule set. OWASP rule set you can just go download. It's OWASP. Yep.
So I've wrestled with mod security multiple engagements, and I did it on a Drupal engagement, and it turned out to be almost completely useless because, especially if you want to edit things in the back end or use certain Ajax-y plugins, because effectively had to whitelist so many different URLs that was had false positive on.
Interesting.
So that was my experience. If it was a different rule set, it would be better suited to playing nice with Drupal. It would be very valuable to know.
Okay. So my answer to that, and I guess if you guys didn't hear, a lot of times mod security you need to whitelist a lot of things in Drupal, so that you're kind of undoing a lot of the good that Drupal's or mod securities and OWASP rules are providing to you. My answer to you there is if you're running like an edit server or like an admin server in the back, I wouldn't even run mod security on it. I'd take it, put it in the DMZ, like keep it isolated so that your editors and admins can actually do what they need to do, and have mod security and the OWASP rules running on the front end, so that you don't actually need to go back and like undo the good that OWASP is providing to your system. I mean, unfortunately, like that might not be always a great answer or solution, but that's definitely what I would suggest. So there's also another Apache tool called mod evasive. It does some hash table kind of analysis of incoming user agents, incoming request paths, incoming protocols, and keeps them in memory for a little bit, and then we'll do some comparisons against like what's, does some pattern detection, and it can also do like blocking on the fly. So if you want, if you wanted to say like spin up a JMeter instance and like load test your own server, I've actually accidentally blocked myself when like prepping for this because it was like, oh, this is a flood detection and I'm going to use IP tables to ban you, and it did it automatically, which is kind of cool, also kind of scary because maybe there's a bot that comes and grabs a lot of content off your site occasionally, and you definitely don't want to block them, but maybe it's just a matter of, hey guys, like slow it down a little. That's a totally valid request to make to someone who's chewing a lot of data off your site because it's costing you money. Ultimately you're paying for bandwidth. But yeah, mod evasive is kind of neat. It's one of those things where you have to definitely balance like your security posture with how much you want to load up your server to serve. So like, I've been lucky enough to work in environments where you can have 32 gigs of RAM on a web server, and it's just nice to say like, oh yeah, we can install anything we want on it because the performance isn't going to be negatively affected because we're not going to be running out of RAM. But in a typical kind of low budget kind of like bootstrapped kind of thing, you might not even want to run this because it needs a lot of memory to take. Also, another tool of our trade is Splunk or similar. Like, I love Splunk. It's awesome. Use my referral code. I can give it to you at the end. I also really wish Nginx had some of these, mature tools. I did a lot of Googling around for stuff like a web application firewall for Nginx. It just doesn't exist. There's some kind of talk about it in Russian in Nginx forum land that it's not quite there yet, and Nginx is still there was a 1.0 release like within the last 2 years, so it's getting there, and I just like to include this slide because I really like Nginx and encourage everyone to use it. But if security and staying up during DDoS is your thing, Nginx probably isn't the tool for you, just because you can't install mod security directly into it, or mod evasive directly into it. That's just what I think. So this is a Drupal convention, right? Let's talk about what you can do with Drupal to prevent and kind of like harden your attack surface against DDoS. So who has seen this before? It's pretty innocuous. Vanilla install Drupal 7. Bardic theme, generated some content on it. Anyone tell me what's vulnerable on this site? Okay. All right, good. So yeah, you're right. The search and the login and account creation. Can anyone tell me why? That's maybe a thing to not use.
Whenever I put up a site like this, I get a ton of bots requesting new accounts.
Okay, that's true. I'm thinking a little more generally, though.
Oh.
Exactly. So these are doing post requests. If anyone's familiar with HTTP, there's generally the web, it's either a GET, which is just give me your content, and a post is, I want to do something on the server, which often means that it's uncached. So in Drupal land, by default, Drupal accepts posts at any path. So if you notice, here's the HTML of the previous page, form action / which, that's fine because you're posting to the home page, right? But if you go to another page, like a blog post, that's going to be form action node 123, and you can post. So like you can accept a post, and Drupal will accept a post on any path, which greatly affects the attack surface of your site, because now it's hard to say like you only have a search box, but a post to any path is valid for that search. So why not narrow them down a little bit? You can form alter paths so that they have the action only being to like form action search / node, and that enables you to do something like tell your you can write a local rule in mod security to only ever accept a post on that path, or you can come up with a list of valid post paths and only allow posts on that path. You can tell your CDN provider to say, I want to only allow posts on this path, and then maybe do some referral munging so that you can so you can only allow certain referrers to post on that path, which greatly reduces your attack surface, because now if you don't have a referrer of davidstoline.com, which is my site, and you're not posting to valid post paths, it's just going to go off into nowhere land. It might do a GET request. Like I can convert the request in the back end with mod security. So the next thing I kind of want to talk about, and that's kind of basically all the Drupal I have, because Drupal's pretty secure. You can also do a lot of caching. If you've ever been to a how to make your Drupal site more performant, and I realize that's not a word, but you want to do so much caching that you're never hitting MySQL ever. So this means, your typical high availability like LAMP stack. You have Memcache or Redis. You have multiple web servers behind a load balancer. You're using Varnish. All that kind of Drupal wisdom that I'm not necessarily going to cover here. I'm glad to take questions on it afterwards, though. But if also you're dealing with any kind of high traffic events, you really want to be using a CDN. There's really expensive. There's also some beginnings of free ones. There's a free one called Cloudflare that all you do is change your DNS and it does some caching for you. Granted, they don't do a ton of traffic like, say, an L3 or an Akamai or a Limelight would do, but it's better than nothing. It's better to offload as much as you possibly can, because if you have a high traffic event and it takes your origin down and it costs your business millions of dollars, the $100,000 a month that something like a CDN may cost you is pennies in the pool. So you have one, right? Like, you're using it. This could even include serving assets out of S3. Like, there's no reason to overwhelm your web serving infrastructure by serving like your CSS out of it. That little bit even helps if it's kind of a dumb DDoS just doing GET requests. So you want to just offload as much as humanly possible into your cache, into your CDN, and then you kind of have a nice footprint for protecting your site from a kind of a general DDoS attack. So that's kind of all I have for you right now. I'm just interested in your questions. If you got any, if you want to tell me I'm wrong about something, please do.
So when you say CDN, you mean something like Varnish?
Well, so Varnish is a reverse proxy that does caching. You can kind of think of it as a local host CDN, but when I'm talking about a CDN, I'm talking about like a third party, like an Akamai or an L3, that does some voodoo to sit in front of your site, and you serve your traffic out of their network. So like Akamai has 100,000 servers throughout the world that can serve tons of traffic at any given time to anyone because they're close. Like the servers, if you know what this is I'm talking about, you can ping an Akamai server anywhere, and it's probably 1 or 2 hops away from where you are at any point in the world, except maybe like Africa or like the desert somewhere. But it's it's a product. It's called the Content Delivery Network. There's probably like 5 big players in the market at the moment, but there's starting to be some smaller upsets like Cloudflare that offer their service for free too. Yep.
What's your experience
I use it because I just think they have this network of servers that I don't have, and they can serve traffic a lot quicker. They are minimizing hops to my origin basically. So if I can get traffic into a big infrastructure like that, I use it on my personal blog. Like, I have a global response time of like under 200 milliseconds on my website, which does anyone have that? I don't think. Like, I'm in like Google land of response time on davidsolian.com. And that's the service they provide to me. So I think it's awesome, and that's a Drupal site. I love it, and it's free. Like, it's not gonna hurt, right?
Which one was it?
Cloudflare. And back? You're right. You're right. So yeah, in a DDoS I was involved in, we actually were able to be in Anonymous's chat room where they were passing around the Hoik file. So it was just a matter of getting the file, setting up some block rules, and Anonymous was super confused as to why they weren't able to take down our site. So I mean, you're right. If you can use social media to your advantage and get in their chat rooms and like download their files, it only helps your site stay up longer. Yeah, I mean, it's very clear on Twitter where these people are doing actions, and they say, join us in this IRC chat room, like, come fight against tyranny in this you know, chat room, here's a file, download it and start attacking. Like, that's how they do this, is crowdsourcing, and you can use the crowdsourcing to your advantage.
Yeah, I can also highly recommend, if you can afford it, DOSRS.
Yeah, that's another tool too.
I was going to say, regardless of what you're doing to do, what you're using to do filtering, to generate response, but lots of great knowledge, you should never use the last rule that you have to discriminate between DOS versus OMG DDoS. You guys save that one in reserve so you can find another way to discriminate between them. So that as they work around your blockers, you can continue to block them.
Right. And there's also, there's another school of thought where if they're not negatively impacting like legitimate traffic, don't even block them. Let them come through. I know that this happens in the government a lot, just because it's swatting at a fly that doesn't need to be swatted at, basically. So, yeah. Good.
As far as bad actors, really focus on anonymous and certain patterns of behavior.
Right.
Are there other types of specific actors that you talk about? And maybe different patterns for them?
So there's always the state-sponsored kind of things, North Koreans, Chinese, like, the axis of evil kind of players. They're often doing kind of things on a more intelligent level, so that kind of thing you may not notice until your whole site's down anyways. That's unfortunate. Most of my experience, though, is really only in the anonymous arena. I would kind of like to kind of come against a higher level foe than. Oh yeah, you're probably right, but yeah. So yeah, that's most of my experience. Yep. That's always one thing where your site or your content administrators, want this blog post up in 5 minutes, and your TTLs are set to 20, and there's always that kind of trade-off that you make between getting content that's fresh out there and getting content that kind of keeps your origin safe as much as possible. It's something you kind of have to decide internally. If you have certain paths that you want to keep a lower TTL, Drupal makes it really easy to be able to like tag something with a taxonomy and change the path on the fly so that maybe now it sticks it into a lower TTL area, right? But, if it's that important and needs to go out there, it's just a little expansion of your attack surface, but it's definitely a lot safer than saying, I want every TTL on the site to be 2 minutes, because you're just lowering the percentage that you can offload into Akamai or Limelight or whatever.
Have you used any modules that can let you specify those things dynamically?
Unfortunately, no.
To a CDN in the back.
So usually the CDN is something that like the CDN provider will like work with you to configure. There are some modules on D.O. There's an Akamai module and an Akamai ESI module. Like the Akamai module will let you do things like you have that blog post that really needs to go out now, and you can purge the path in Akamai, so it'll come and like Akamai will come and refresh its content from cache as though your TTLs were ignored. It's great. It also helps your administrators like kind of deal with that, like, oh, there's this 15-minute TTL and this needs to be out now. So there's that. There's also the ESI module, which if you guys are familiar with what an ESI is, it'll write a kind of custom XML document that will do on the edge. So in Akamai or in Varnish, it'll like stick a block in that's loaded from another path. That's not specific to anything DDoS, though. It's just a way to like segregate your content out. But anyone else? Yep.
So the Akamai thing is kind of interesting. A lot of the work around here is government. I have a little task with this in one of my papers, and a lot of times government folks deal with Akamai with a white glove kind of relationship where they have an Akamai rep, will work with them to set up the rules as appropriate, and it's kind of a hands-off sort of thing. It's a little odd that, like, I'm like, where's the control panel? Where's the access to this and that? You may or may not get that, with type of engagement you have. And maybe until everything hits the fan.
Right.
So.
Well, I mean, my experience with Akamai has been great. We've got reps who are awesome. I've got access to pretty much like Akamai's awesome control panel, which, if any of you use it, they just released like a new version and makes the graphs real pretty and stuff like that. But yeah, I've never had a bad experience with having like Akamai help with something.
It's like good stuff. It's like they have a high level of support.
It's also extremely expensive.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Akamai does events like Akamai runs all bandwidth for iTunes. They run all bandwidth for like the NFL Network. So they did stream the Super Bowl. They are a major bandwidth player all over the world. So I mean, with that comes a price. And there are very few players in that arena. Yep.
Yeah, in terms of log files, one issue that I've had is getting to the server to get to log files when you want to attack.
Right.
So, other than Splunk, I mean, is there the tools you mentioned? Is there something that works well with like sucking down the log files real time so you can look at things as they're happening?
So yeah, most of my experience is Linux. So the Linux tools that you can use in that arena, like syslog ng, you can configure. I don't know what the technical term for it is, but you can kind of configure log endpoints so that syslog ng will sit on the server like tailing an access log, and we'll be porting it to like a central logging server in real time, so that when your server might be serving like its brains out and has a load of like 1,000, of course you can't SSH into it and like look at the logs, but maybe in the background it's still sending those logs to your relay server or your log server, so you can get at them and kind of do that analysis that you need to do. Also, like Splunk has a little Java thing you can install on the server which does the same thing, and so does Logstash. And you run an agent that forwards to you. You have some? Yeah. All the kind of log agents have that like centralization of data collection kind of thing.
It's possible when you set up something like that, and you want to do it in a way, if you can, so that the sort of front-facing channel out to the web and the channel that you're using to send your logs out are not the same channel, so you'll end up
Right.
sort of making a bad problem worse.
Yeah.
And then you lose the logs and sort of
Right. Yep.
To the extent that the server goes down and the rate goes down, could you speak to patterns where anonymous will, after a certain number of, a certain amount of time, that this can go away or feel like they've won the day?
I mean, your mileage varies with this because it's basically who participates or who hops in these IRC channels. We've had a lot of talk about trying to change the attack ourselves. We're in the channel as a normal user, but they don't know I work at X website, trying to prevent attack. It's been, we've talked about it, but we've never wanted to actually do it because I don't know.
Yeah, that can come back.
Right. So a lot of the times, if they don't see that they're making an effect on your origin, they're going to give up. These people, at least anonymous, I've found are basically kids, or they're not super sysadmins. They're not DevOps guys. They're people who don't really understand how the web works. They're downloading a tool and using it. Because I remember sitting in the chat room, like reading the scroll back, and it was like, oh, do you think X website uses a load balancer? It's like, of course they use a load balancer. Like, it's that kind of thing where I'm probably grossly underestimating anonymous in this one attack, because I'm sure there's a group of anonymous that's super smart and might even be sitting in this room. I hope not, because my website's down then. But it's that kind of thing.
Yeah, if you can afford to go down, the best thing is go down, let them win.
Yeah.
Go dark for X amount of time, whatever your comfort limit is, go down for that amount of time. And, if they can claim victory, that's what they want. Let them have the victory.
Yeah, at least in our case, we were basically seeing like private organizations. Everybody else in the press release said they were going to attack.
Right.
We have to deal with it for the next 5 days.
I can tell who are like the government guys in this room because I have a feeling like we've probably all dealt with kind of the same situation. Like we're getting the same intelligence on things, so it's funny. Yeah.
Well, denial of services is one type of attack. We all know about that. But last year we've read reports about these cellular ways of attacking, and they plant the bot within the computer, and it's not detected for months. And these are launched by governments and stuff. Can you speak to that with regard to Drupal, whether Drupal might be susceptible to that type of attack?
Well, so the question is like, what happens if attackers get into your system and install like bad things onto your system? Which I would say, if the attackers have access to your systems, you're in big trouble.
Just don't connect any centrifuges to your Drupal thing.
Right. Or I mean that kind of thing it's hard to mitigate against because it means that Drupal's not at fault. I mean, it could be at fault. It could be used as a vector for maybe installing that.
We're not talking Drupal.
Well, right. But maybe if any of you have sat in a security session with like Greg Canadison, Greg always talks about like your themes and your custom modules are what makes your sites vulnerable. And maybe you have like a vulnerable file uploader that you wrote as a one-off one night and completely forgot about, but now maybe someone can upload arbitrary PHP and run it in that file uploader. So it's all about like following Drupal's security best practices and hoping for the best. And there's not a lot you can do if an attacker has access to your systems and is able to run your centrifuges into the ground and ruin your nuclear program for the next 20 years. But I'm sorry, that doesn't really answer your question. But